So we have Colin, Winta, and Shannon as well. So we're going to jump right in. I'm just going to first define what selection is. It's a really long definition, so I'm going to read it because I did not memorize it. So selection is the process of collecting and evaluating information about an individual in order to extend an offer of employment. Such employment could either be a first position for a new employee or a different position for a current employee. The selection process is performed under legal and environmental constraints and addresses the future interests of the organization and of the individual. So that's the definition, and the book differentiates between selection and hiring. So does anyone know what the difference between selection and hiring is? And if you offer up an answer, we have candy. So you'll be rewarded for your participation.
It's not just candy, it's chocolate.
So does anyone know what the difference between hiring and selection is? You can use your book, you can guess. Dr. Casper, do you know?
I think I read this once in the book. Isn't hiring basically stating that we just give somebody a job willy-nilly without a process, and selection is the process?
Yeah, pretty much. So Dr. Casper gets 2 pieces of candy.
So your pick.
The difference, like Dr.
Kit
Casper
Kat,
said,
that sounds
selection
good.
is, you, like what the definition said, like you're collecting and evaluating the employee, you're making sure that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to perform the job. And while hiring is just you make an offer to someone while no evaluation is made on their skills or abilities. So an example would be someone hiring a family member because they had a job open and they just brought them in without interviewing them or anything like that. So that's an example of hiring versus selection. And the book makes a big differentiation about the two. Because normally, I know I use the terms interchangeably, so they just wanted to differentiate between the two. So now I'm going to look at the first part of the definition, and so it's collecting and evaluating information in order to extend an offer of employment for a first-time position. So that's kind of obvious that a first-time position is you're going to be hiring people or looking to hire people who are external to the company. And the reason that it's important to evaluate and collect information is because one of the main goals of selection is to pick from the pool of candidates that you have, those who have the knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's why it's so important to select rather than hire.
Well, now, at the end of selection, don't you hire?
Yeah. You do.
So why are you subjugating those two words?
Well, that's just what the book did. So I guess it's before you bring them on, before you bring them to employment. So I guess you can use them synonymously afterward, but before you bring them on as an employee, it
differentiates what you're saying is differentiates a process for employment.
Exactly.
Hiring, hire your needs. There's no process. Selection indicates there's a process.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So that's why that is important. So can anyone tell me some tools that are used to evaluate and collect information on an employee or a candidate, I should say?
I'm getting low on chocolate when this Nelson Week's gone. I'm back in, guys.
Background check?
Yeah, that's a good one. Background check.
The resume.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cover letter.
Yeah, definitely. So those are a few, and then I have a list of some of the ones. My list is not exhaustive. I don't think I have some of the ones that you guys said. So the first one is an application form. That's pretty basic. I think every single person has filled out one of these if you've ever had a job in your life. And that's just a pretty basic way for a company to weed out the people who aren't minimally qualified. They can't afford to test everyone in every single way. So this is just a good way for them to just weed out the people who aren't even qualified to begin with. So that's the first one. The second one is an interview, and the group last week talked a lot about that. So basically, you want to make sure that it's standardized and systematic, just meaning that it's structured so you're asking the same questions in the same order, just to make sure that you're not just making a guess. Well, I thought this person was good. Someone else could think they were terrible. So you just want to make sure you have a format for that. And that goes for all of these tools that you'll use. You want to do them systematically. You don't want to do some of them for some candidates and none of them, like you skip around and just do a couple. You pretty much want to make sure you're being consistent with all the tools that you're using to make sure that you can, rate the candidates fairly. And then that's a funny picture, being nervous in an interview. And then the next tool, we have personality test, that's that one. And then like a Wonderlic or like sort of like an intelligence test. I know the job that I currently work for, the president of the company really loves the personality tests. The issue with those, though, is you can really just make up whatever answer you want. You can, if you think that a job should have a certain personality, you can make up your answers to, go along with that job. So there's no objective, they can't go into your mind and see that you're lying or not. So it's really easy to lie on the personality test. Wonderlic or any other kind of intelligence type test, those are pretty good too, but I know myself, I'm not a good tester. I do fine in school and I'm a good student, but I do not test well. I hate standardized tests. So those you want to take with a grain of salt as well, because the person could just be really nervous. They could just, have a block or whatever. So both of these you kind of have to take with a grain of salt and,
Are you going to talk any more about the Wonderlic?
I wasn't planning on it, but I can explain it.
Why does it say NFL on the top of it?
Is that a question for me?
For anyone?
Oh.
Why
Well, I
don't-
just put that there because it was just a Wonderlic picture that I found. Not all of them will say that.
A lot of them will. It's because during the combines for the rookies, they do all of the 40-yard dashes, the bench pressing, and all that stuff. They use the Wonderlic as the intelligence test for these football players. That's where it got its, I'm going to make up a word here, famosity, is through the NFL combine testing. And they have quarterback ranges. Quarterback should be in this range, defensive backs in this range, running backs in this range. And it's funny to see some of the quarterbacks that have done, or players that are really good that have done very poorly on the Wonderlic. They come out with those lists every year as well.
Yeah, so the Wonderlic basically just, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it's a 12-minute test. You answer as many questions as you can. I know that the company that I work for, you have to get a 20 in order to be hired. If you get a little bit lower and you do good on your interview, they'll still consider you, but they won't hire you unless you get a 20 on it. It's a pretty stressful test. Some people are like, oh, the 12 minutes takes forever. For me, when I took it, it just flew by. Like I said, I do not test well. I hate standardized tests. So take those with a grain of salt because they're not perfect. They have their issues. The next tool that I'm going to talk to you about is a word sample. This is pretty much, say you're a baker and they ask you to bake a cake. That's just pretty much showing that you can do the work that they're going to be asking you to do. And one that goes along with it is a job trial. You have to be careful with these because they can be illegal if they're not done correctly, because a lot of times they're unpaid, and they're legal if they're done only for the amount of time that you can assess if they're fit for the position or not. So when I was looking up stuff for this, there was a little cartoon of a guy, seeing if he could work at a circus, and then they had him shoveling elephant poop all day or whatever, and then at the end of the day, he was like, did I get the job? And the guy was like, no, you go away. So he should have been paid for that time because that was far too long for him to demonstrate that skill. So you have to be careful with a job trial. So it just depends on the type of job it is, the complexity of the job, how long the shift should last. So
What do you think of the guy with the cufflinks and no tie? Go ahead, please. Just ignore me right now.
Okay, so the second part of the definition is a different position for current employees, also known as promotion. So how different how different is initial selection and a selection for promotion? Does anyone know what the basic difference is? It's pretty basic. It has to do with the pool of candidates. Can anyone tell me what the difference is between selecting for promotion and selecting for the first time.
Like you're picking people outside of the company first, and then
Right.
the other one is like inside. of the
Right,
company.
exactly. Yeah. So that's the basic difference. The one you're hiring people, the initial you are doing, you're hiring or you're selecting people from outside of the company. This promotion is people internal. And so some different ways to recruit for a promotion is the first one you could do is a bulletin board. I don't know if any company still uses those because that's pretty, old school. Or you could do a company intranet. That's probably more likely where it would be. You could do an HR announcement because people expect, job announcements to come from HR. What you could do is you could request managers to pick people who they think would be good candidates, and you could also nominate yourself for a position. The thing with managerial, them picking people, you just have to be careful because, of course, there's always going to be bias in the world and always going to be favoritism and different things. So manager might not choose somebody to be selected for it because they might like them on their team and they don't want to give them up, so they're being selfish, or they might hate somebody, so they might want to get them out of their team. So you just have to be careful with that as well. Just use common sense and evaluate what's really going on. So those are just a few ways to recruit for promotion. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. Some issues with promotion: there can be previous bias and impressions. So, for instance, they could be doing a really good job in one position, and they might just assume that they'll be really good in another position, which isn't necessarily true because, as the second issue, no further tests might be conducted, so they might not really have a good feel if they really are a good fit for a position or not. And the words of wisdom from Michael Scott, it's making some dangerous assumptions. So you just have to be careful with that. You have to make sure that you're really testing them for the new position that they'd be getting and not just assuming they'll be a good fit for it. And for my new and you, I work for a family-owned company, so those are always tricky because there can definitely be favoritism and nepotism towards the family members. So, so the company that I work for, what happened was last summer, the recruiting manager, she resigned, and one of our recruiters had previous experience in a managerial position. She was a branch manager for years beforehand, and so when the current manager resigned, she had expressed interest in becoming the new recruiting manager, and she was talking about it with some people, and then maybe a week later, the president's daughter-in-law came in and was the new recruiting manager out of nowhere. So the recruiter was pretty upset about that because she had so much experience, and the daughter-in-law really didn't have as much experience, if any, in a managerial position. So that's something to watch out for. Unfortunately for her, for the recruiter, there's nothing she could do about it. But she actually eventually resigned because she didn't feel valued. So that's something to be aware of in promotion and in selection as well. So now Shannon's going to talk about some legal aspects of selection.
Thank you.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Shannon. I'm going to talk to you about the legal aspects. So this is kind of just the overview of what I'm going to go over right now. The principles of the federal regulation of HR activities, some specific laws and executive orders appropriate to selection, evidence that you use to decide if discrimination has occurred, and just a little overview of some major court cases. So the basic principles can be traced back to 1887, and they are just to prevent monopolies within companies. So the purpose is to promote the well-being of the industry. And then there's a regulatory model that's used. It was created by two people, James Levinka and Vita Scarpello. And it just helps HR specialists to see if something's going wrong, like where the problem began and kind of how to solve it, so what kind of actions to take. And then this is the chart. It's actually straight from the book. So that's their regulatory model. This is a continuation of it. So this is all the laws. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but that's where it goes from there. So there's the Civil Rights Act of 1991. That's an amendment of the old Civil Rights Act, and that just addresses evidence for discrimination. So it also goes into the ceiling for damages of discrimination, scores of selection tests, and the establishment of the Glass Ceiling Commission. And it recommends ways to remove the barriers that prevent minorities and women in advancement in organizations. There's also the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and it's been amended several times. It's intended just to promote the advancement of older people within organizations, protects anybody over the age of 40. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against qualified people that have some kind of disability, and it can apply to any company that has 25 or more workers. So that's anybody that has either a physical or a mental disability, or that has had one previously in their lifetime, even if they're disregarded in that way, it still affects and protects them. And then this is just a little cartoon to show you how people sometimes don't take it seriously. Like maybe if you can't always see that someone's disabled, but you still need to be aware of it and be told. So it impacts selection because they're not allowed to take tests that'll screen people if they have a disability. So if they are asking a question, they're not allowed to ask about the severity of the disability unless it directly affects the job that they're going to be doing. And the disabled person is responsible for informing the person, because if they get fired and they try and tell them later, you discriminated against me because I'm disabled, the employer might not have known, so they could have been fired for not performing up to par, but it may not be their fault. And they're also required to make reasonable accommodation. So this is anything that the company could do that wouldn't pose in undue hardship. So if the person was in a wheelchair, they would be required to put a little ramp up for the person, or it's just easy things, nothing that would cost too much money to the company, but as long as they can still perform the job with a little help, that's a little accommodation. So there's discrimination. Disparate treatment is when there are different standards that are applied to different protected groups of people, but it might not be intentional on their part. If you're specifically sometimes hiring for females, it's not always intended, but it sometimes happens and people notice it, and then it's disparate treatment. And disparate impact is when you apply the same standards to everything, but the net results are different. So the disparate treatment evidence is the McDonnell-Douglas rule. You have to show that that the standards exist. The person belonged to a protected class, that they applied for the job, which they were currently seeking for, and then despite their qualifications, they were still rejected, and then after the rejection, the company still continues to seek someone even though they would have met the standards. So in order to win a case against that, the applicant would have to show that the intention to discriminate was there. And then for disparate impact evidence, you have to show that various groups have been affected in the same manner. So that you have to look at the statistical data. You can look at the 4/5 rule. So the ratio of any group must be at least 80% of the ratio of the most favorably treated group. Sorry. And then some major court cases, was the Griggs versus Duke Power. So it started in 1967, and there were 13 black employees that filed a case action suit against Duke Power, charging discriminatory employment practices. So they said that the tests that were given were purposely screening out black people because all they were asking for was a high school diploma to pass a mechanical aptitude test and a general intelligence test, and it didn't apply to people that were already working within the company. So the Supreme Court ruled that the lack of discriminatory intent was not a sufficient defense because 34% of the white males in the area had a high school degree, while only 12% of black males did. So it was still, that was how it was affecting it. So they said that the company could continue to use these tests, but they had to prove that it was somehow related to the job. And the company hadn't done that because they had people that were currently working there that did not have high school diplomas but were still able to perform the job. So you have to be able to show that it's related. And then there is the OFCCP versus Ozark Airlines. And Gary Frey had a non-functioning left ear, but his right ear was still perfectly fine. He had that like since his childhood. And he applied to be an airline technician. And they told him that he was qualified for the job, but they said that he would not be able to be hired because of his hearing disability, because they said it would endanger him and other people in the company. But they didn't really look into it. They didn't prove anything. So they told him that because he couldn't prove that he could perform the job without hurting someone, that he couldn't have it. But he won the case. He was awarded back pay. And the OFCCP told him that it was the company's problem. They should have been the ones to prove that if he was employed, that it would have endangered other people. So it also states that the disabled person is qualified. So if they're qualified, they're capable of performing the job, they would have to do reasonable accommodation. And then there's Jack Gross versus the FPL Financial Services. The central issue, they wanted to prove how much evidence you need in order to produce an age discrimination case. So the guy Gross had worked for the services since 1971, and then in 2001 he was moved up to a new position, and then 2 years later they reassigned him to a new role, and then they gave all his old job tasks to a 43-year-old woman when he was 54 at the time. So he filed a suit against the company saying that his age had something to do with his job reassignment. Can anybody guess how the outcome of this case ended up? Do you think he won or lost the case? Can someone just guess?
Yes.
He won? Okay. He did not, because it was a mixed motives case. So the age, he was saying that the age was like one of the factors, but they said that the but-for reason was the decision. So the decision would have been different, more favorable to him, except for the fact that age was used. But they said the decision was, it wasn't able to be proved that it was his age. There was nothing written. There was nothing solid to prove that the age was the reason. So they didn't have the direct evidence. So the summary of the EEO is the basis of discrimination. The charges have to be protected groups. So as long as you're under race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, or physical or mental handicap. The basis of evidence, the charges have to be brought with little substantial evidence, other than the fact that the individual wasn't chosen for the position. It sometimes can publicly embarrass the companies, so they'll choose to settle outside of court just to avoid the long hours in court and the expenses, as well as like people getting a bad name for the company. And then the options of the organization, they could just discontinue their practices and look into alternatives to not discriminate against people, or they can conduct a validation study to support the fact that their selection instruments are job-related. I know you, I experienced in my first job when I used to work at Chick-fil-A, that they did reasonable accommodation for people. We had 2 different people that were kind of, I guess, like mentally handicapped, and they kind of created jobs for them. It was jobs that other people could have done, but they went out of their way to make specific positions just for these people to work a couple hours a day, a few days a week, just so they weren't discriminating against people. For example, there was a girl that would just clean out the dining room. Obviously, they would never like let her use the register or do anything with money, but she was able to just go out, clean the tables, collect the trays. And the other part I know on you is disparate impact. So I work in a bar, and we get a lot of applications for all the different positions, but they'll only hire females for servers and bartender positions, and they'll only hire males for security and bar back positions. And a lot of guys sometimes get upset, like when they come in to apply, like they want to apply for a serving job, and I mean, we let them apply, but they would never actually hire these people for that position. And then up next is Winta discussing the selection program.
So I'm going to be talking to you about the steps of the selection program. There are 6 steps that consist in the selection program. The first is job analysis. The second is the identification of relevant job performance dimensions. And the third is the identification of knowledge, skills, and abilities, which we know as KSAs. Fourth is the development of assessment devices that measure the KSAs. And the fifth is the validation of the assessment devices. And the last one, we have the use of the assessment devices in the processing of applicants. In the steps of the development that are in the selection program, we can argue that the sufficiency of the development steps strongly influence the sufficiency of the selection process. If little attention and effort is dedicated to these steps, then the usefulness is going to have limitations and restrictions. One way to view the selection process is to think of an application, an interview, or an employment test. When we look at an application, you can see that it can quite easily be printed. Interviews can be conducted without too much prior work at all, and employment tests can be purchased and administered to applicants. If these developmental steps are sincerely addressed, the usefulness of the selection program is going to be greatly improved. The critical issue, though, is not whether an organization can gather all of this information and see who they want to offer the employment. The actual issue here is if the organization can take this information from the applicants, relate it strongly to job performance, and then effectively take this information and identify who the best applicant for the job would be. Job analysis is the gathering of information about a job or an organization. Information includes 5 elements. This consists of tasks, results, equipment, material used, and the environment that the characteristics of the job entail. Information serves 2 main purposes. The first is to communicate to possible applicants information about the nature and demands of the job, so what you would expect walking into the job. And the second is the job analysis information provides a database for other steps in the developmental process, and this is the more critical purpose. In identifying relevant job measures, we look at selection specialists who must have a working knowledge of what success is comprised of, because if they don't know what they want, they won't know what to look for in the applicant to be successful. There are some jobs that the measurement of performance is straightforward and direct, and others it's harder to look for. In this case, the supervisor is who you would look for to rate the job performance. So an example of this would be a group project. It's very hard to say this particular individual did all of the work or did none of the work. So then you would look to the supervisor or the other team members. When identifying worker characteristics, job analysis information and job performance data are both looked upon. HR specialists must identify the KSAs and other employee characteristics that a worker should possess in order to carry out this job successfully. These KSAs become the basic characteristics to be assessed in applicants. In the development of assessment devices, once the KSAs have been identified, the appropriate selection devices must then be either found or constructed. These instruments can be categorized into 4 groups. This consists of application banks, biographical data forms, reference checks, mental and special abilities tests, personality assessment inventories, and simulation and performance measures. There are 2 requirements for choosing selection devices. This consists of the device must measure the KSAs the selection specialist has identified for the job. And the second is the assessment device should be able to differentiate among applicants. So it should be able to distinguish between promising and unpromising applicants. And if the applicants seem to be too similar or too alike, then that means that the interviewer questions are just too general. In the validation procedures, the purpose of validation is to offer evidence that data from the selection instruments are related to job performance. The best way to produce this evidence, though, is through statistical data analysis. One type of validation is empirical validation. There are two types collected in this type. The first is that the scores on the selection devices from a representative sample of individuals. And the second is that it must measure how well each of these individuals perform in certain aspects of the job. Empirical validation involves calculating correlation coefficients between scores on the selection instruments and on the job performance measures. In addition to empirical validation, other types of validation procedures can also be used. This includes content validation, which systematically takes the data produced by the judgments of workers and managers and uses them to determine the relationship between the selection test and job performance. Only after the validation phase has been completed, then one can take this evidence and the information collected by the selection devices and see that it is indicative of the job performance. If these instruments are not related to the job performance, then their use can be costly, because if you're not choosing an optimal candidate, then you're going to be wasting your time. However, organizations often choose not to fully carry out these steps in the development process, and they're only going to be harming themselves in the long term. So can anyone tell me who do the identified selection instruments measure? What is the employer looking for when he is looking to select you? What does he look for in you?
Requirement to do the job.
Basically. What do we call that? Yes, KSAs.
If I can, I probably should turn this up when I said that. Just KSAs, kick asses. You got to have that to do the job. Hey, can you turn on these backlights?
Good job.
I
was like, probably goes to bed.
I think it's the blinds that are all down that's making it so dark in here.
So
I'm
for
sorry.
my-
Great job.
Sorry. For my new and you, I'm referring back to the job analysis slide. And as mentioned, information serves a big purpose, and it's in order to communicate to us as applicants what the job is going to be entailing, and this minimizes false expectations of the job. So I experienced this. I went to go get a job, and I went on the interview, and the woman told me so many things about the job. I was so excited, and when I went in for the job, the first week was complete opposite of everything she told me, what their objectives were, what their motives were. It was just completely different, so that would lead to job dissatisfaction. And then another thing that I experienced was, which I'm sure all of you have, in group projects, you never know who puts in more effort. I'm sure there's always one who's the leader and people who fall behind. So that's another new in you when, the applicant, you can't really look at just people in the group. You have to look at the person itself. And now we have Colin discussing human resource selection software.
Good evening. Let me move forward a little bit. Actually, now it's there. My name's Colin. I originally didn't work in HR. I was originally an apprentice electrician for like 3 years. And during that time, I worked part-time at Lowe's I've been there for about 7 years. I always worked there at night and in the weekends. So I spent a lot of time there. I started to understand how organizations function a little bit, and I started to get into like how important employees are to an organization. So I stopped with the apprenticeship program. I liked doing electrical work and everything, but I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to do something else. And once I got into I started getting into business a little bit more, and started analyzing Lowe's a little bit, and I started to realize this is kind of what I wanted to get into. So what I do at work, I don't have a new and used slide because I wanted to leave enough slides for something different I'm going to show you guys. I've worked at Lowe's for, like I said, 7 years, and I just started in HR. I think it was in December I started, and what I do is I oversee all of the Philadelphia stores, all the seasonal hires. All the seasonal hires that are getting done right now. I make sure that they go through the process. The selection process is mostly what I handle. Once they get onboarded and everything, then the HR managers in the stores deal with them from there. Originally, the HR managers in the stores would do everything. The HR managers in the stores would put job postings up, select them, interview them, and get them onboarded and get them and deal with all their employee relations issues from there out. So now what we're doing is I have a team that I'm working with that only handles the recruiting, selecting, hiring, and the onboarding process. And then after that, the HR managers, the stores work with them from there on out. So one of the things that we deal with is in HR. Oh, I did. Where did that one come? You didn't put it in there? Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Okay, now we're in the right spot. Anyway, so one of the things that we deal with is one of the things that we use is the HR selection software. Everything that we use is cloud-based. I can access. We have a program that we use. It's called Conexa. It's made by IBM, and we can access it from anywhere. I can access it from this computer here, my phone, anything. So if I'm traveling and I need to, I'm making phone calls to applicants to get them scheduled for interviews or something like that, I can just go on the computer and move them along the process wherever I'm at. This slide here kind of just summarizes a little bit about computer software for HR. Basically, there's two different ways you can go about developing a software program for HR. You can, especially for selection, the easiest, the most common type of selection software is something that it's kind of general, kind of like something you can get off the shelf online. You can order, you can have, it's pretty general. You can go on and pick something out that's going to work well with your company, or you could have something specific developed for your company and tailor it to everything you're going to need. So now I'm going to go over Conexa. I'll show you how it works. If I had, if it wasn't for like privacy issues and everything, I'd be able to show you live. But I have screenshots of everything that I see at work. This page right here, this is what the applicants see online. If you go to like careers.lowes.com, this is what you'll see. You'll see all the positions listed here, and these are all the Philly ones. There's tons more that are posted now. They're starting to come down a little bit. It's starting to wind down. But now I'll show you what it looks like on the inside. This is what we see. The home page. This is the home page here. So up top, if I wanted to say, for example, I wanted to look up a candidate's name. Because we get a lot of phone calls. Go ahead.
Colin, how does it support on the front end the difference between a seasonal and a regular employee? Do they click and go seasonal, and boom, it's got a list, and click and go like a regular hire, and boom, it's got a list, and you back end it out?
I'm focusing on that. If I wanted to, I can look at all of the. I can look at different categories.
Okay.
But I'm focusing mainly on the seasonal hires.
So that it's just ripping it out on the back end of this and giving it to you.
Yes. Well, I have it set so that I'm only viewing the seasonal hires.
I gotcha.
But yeah, you can look at permanents. You can look at specialists, managers, whatever. But if you type in you can type in a candidate's name up here. We have all different requisition numbers. This is basically. If I go back here, you can see.
Oh, you're gonna hate that word.
Requisition.
Rec numbers.
Oh yeah. We have a lot
You're
of
gonna hate that word. What
Now
rec
I'm
number?
starting to remember all of it in my head which one's which.
Yeah.
But anyway, these are the rec numbers here that you can see online. So this corresponds with the rec numbers here. Basically, if there's a bunch of different ways I can go about viewing the applicants. If I go down here, I can hit open. There's also a spot at the top here that I cut out because there's other stuff up there that.
But you also, it's important. I'm just really digging this. That's a new word. You got multiple incumbent positions.
Yes.
So if you need 5, it's kind of a different process than if you just need 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have different requisitions for, like say say we only need say for one store we might have 3 people, or we might need 3 requisitions for outside lawn and garden. But those 3 positions, one of them might require 5, one of them might require 3, and one might require 1 at different times throughout the season. So they get posted at different times throughout the season. Like at first, the one containing one candidate would we get posted first. Then as the season starts to pick up, then you get the 3, and then you get the 5.
How do you split the stores?
What do you mean?
Well, if somebody applies, I saw the address
Right.
on the front side. Are they only applying per store, or are they applying per
They can
job?
apply to whichever ones they want. But now, if
But you have to
we
go to
look
5
at-
different stores.
We look at the ad. We look at where they live. We look and see where they live, and then whichever store is closest to them, we try to get them into that store.
But they don't.
They
There's 3 of the same jobs
Right.
in 3 different addresses. Would
Yeah.
they have to go in and put their name in for all 3?
each one, they have to apply to a store.
Yeah, you might have to remedial train people to do that. I don't see how you would do it any other way, but I've been there, and yeah.
Let me see here. Down here, this section here, it's a little more elaborated. There's a little bit more to this. These are all the different statuses that the applicants are in at the time, or the candidates are in at the time. Like recruiter review. This is basically after they pass the assessment, they go into that folder. And then hiring manager review. That means that we've looked at it. We've looked at the candidate, and we're considering them, and we printed out their information and it's put it into a rec folder that we keep. And then once we're ready to call them, then
Rec folder, you went to paper?
yeah, we have paper. We have lots of paper. And
I was always thinking that one of these days it would be paperless. I never saw how I could do it paperless. My brain's not that big.
if this was a little bit more developed, like if they had,
And that's the whole thing. Nobody wants to spend enough money to make it paperless.
Yeah.
We had Resumex, and it looked very much like this, like 10 years ago. But sorry, go ahead.
No, you're all right. But yeah, these are all different HR statuses. I'll go over them in a little bit too. Let me get out of here. All right, so once you click the open folder there, this takes you to here. These are all the open. These are just some of them. This is only for one store, but there's 63 job postings right now. This is the Northeast Philly store. So what you can do, I think let me see the next slide. All right. So there's a couple different things I can click here. The first one I can click is this job ID. You click there. This will give you all the information. I think that's wrong button, sorry. This will give you the job description. You can go through. This one isn't as some of the HR managers in the stores. They are a little bit more elaborate with their job description and let them know what time. Let the candidates know what time they're going to work, or what time, how many hours to expect. This one's a little more general. But this is it's pretty general.
If you don't tell them what they have to do, then you can expect them to do anything.
whatever.
Yeah, I understand. This isn't less work, guys. This is a trap.
You can see what goes on in different stores too, because some of the HR managers are pickier than others. They'll put the stuff in there, that they want, and some of them they pay for it later.
When I interviewed at Home Depot, they made a big deal about saying, we have our staff meetings on Sunday mornings at 4 a.m. so that's the only time that we aren't open for customers. And boy, they tried to scare me away.
If you scroll down a little bit, this is the same
I like
page.
Lowe's better.
This is the same page. This scroll. If you scroll down, you get this. This up here. We have different names. I blocked out the names, but this lets you know who's overlooking the rec, and then down further. I didn't have room to put that in. There's There's a list of people that are added to that rec that who all can look at it. So there's about this one. I think there's about 5 or 6 people that can actually look at it.
You have to lock it down because if you don't lock it down, to the people that's supposed to be in that chain,
Right.
then you can't have all of your data in there because it has to be non-accessible by those who don't need to know. Social Security number for one, but you guys probably don't use that at all to identify your
What,
candidates.
Social Security numbers? No, they basically for getting their files ready.
Yeah, when it's down the list.
Yeah.
Isn't this fun?
If if I go back here, if I say,
I forgot. I just left this.
so I'm back here. If I click one of these over here, these ones are already down. These postings are already down. So if they're white, that means that they're already down. Now they're not closed. We're still looking through them.
You might have 1,027 to look at. I saw your bulk input there that you're behind on. I saw that.
So if they're orange, that means they're still posted online. These ones the candidates can't see anymore. But anyway, I'll go back here. If I click that little that push pin, this takes me to here, and this allows me to change how long it's posted for. The maximum that we can post it for is 30 days. We originally started for 10 usually, and then go further out if we need to. And then these
Why?
The,
Oh, you have to close it to end the candidate. Well, that's how you get
Right.
around the flow.
Yeah, but I forget what the rule is. I forget why they have that rule.
I think it may be the candidate flow, because if you didn't, then you have to have a continual candidate flow, and that is a nightmare. But if you close it after 30,
Yeah.
and then if you still need people,
It's wrong.
you can reopen it.
We
Or
have to open a new record.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
or by using a new rec,
Yeah.
and then you can track. Yeah,
That's fine.
clever.
So this allows me, like, if say I can post all the recs that I need right now. I can post them, like say I wanted to post them in January for the whole summer, I can do that. And this right here, if I started on whatever date, posted on this date, but days until posted, if I wanted to open in like right now, then I can set it to this date. Set it for however many days until today. And then this right here, it says external. That means that external candidates. This one, means that you're only trying to get internals. And then this one down here, inside the store, they have a little kiosk where there's a computer that you can apply on. So this enables that. Let me see. There's nothing else on there. Let me go back here. So now if I go into this little folder piece right here, if I click that, when they're white, that means it's closed. That means it's done with, it's over with, we're not touching it anymore. If it's orange, that means we're still working on it. So this, if I click on that folder, it takes me to here. Now, normally the candidate's names would be right there. The little check's right there.
You know what? Maybe I shouldn't record that screen at all.
That's all right. There's nothing.
Okay.
The check mark's right there. That means that I've already looked at that person. And then down the list here, there's when they go through the assessment, there's if they get a certain score, they'll get their status will be recommended. If they don't get a certain score, if they get below a certain score, then it'll be recommended with caution. So you might want to be careful with that person and looking.
Score on the assessment, is that Wonderlic?
I forget what it's called actually. I know,
Bennett
I don't-
Mechanical or something,
Yeah.
probably.
I don't usually look at them now.
You just see, you're processing it through and see if they make it or not. Is the assessment online? Do they take it online
Take
from
it
their?
online, yeah.
Okay.
And then if they do really bad, then it says in red, not recommended. When it says recommended with caution, it's yellow. Let's see what's next. All right, so if I click this little red button right here, that takes me here, and this shows the status of that employee that you're selecting here. So if I want to go with this guy here, then I hit that. Oh, this one's already not selected. If I want to go with say this one, the assessment's passed, I'll click that, and then this takes me to here. So in here it shows all the rec numbers that they applied for, and this shows these are all seasonal positions, and then if it's a permanent position, it'll say plumbing or whatever department they applied to right there, and then this section here says updated by whatever HR manager or whoever was looking at it last. This status here, if there's I'll go over the statuses. Let me see now I'll go forward. I don't go that far. There's if I click this right here, if I say I wanted to move this person to a first interview, or just look at let everybody know that we're looking at them, I can click that right there, and a box will pop up, and it'll say an option for hiring manager review. The next, or you can click first interview scheduled if you want to call them up and schedule them for an interview. Then you'll hit first interview scheduled. And then after that, it goes to second interview scheduled, which now we changed the process. We don't need to do second interviews anymore. So now it'll be second interview not required. And then, or after that, it can be not selected, or not selected after first interview. Like if they go through the interview and they don't do so well, then you're not selected after that. So all their statuses show up here for all the positions that they applied for. There's two tabs up here. This is the current status, and then you can go to status history.
So how do you do that? Person's got applied for 10 jobs.
This person actually, look how long the bar is right there.
Okay, that person applied for 50
lot,
jobs.
yeah, that person-
So how does he get selected?
Different managers, like this particular person applied to jobs. I think they had a house in Michigan or something. They had family in Michigan, and they kept going back and forth between here and Michigan. So they applied for jobs here, and they applied for jobs in Michigan. So they have a history with those. So they're not going to get they're not going to get selected, or they shouldn't at least. The HR manager that had actually interviewed them probably didn't look at the history to see that that all this that there's all this stuff in there.
Not selected, not
Yeah,
selected. I see.
If
They're
you
not
go
all
down,
new.
it's-
Some of them are history.
Yeah.
I see.
So let's see here. If I click, if I click on their name, I'll show you what. If you click on their name, I'll show you what you get. You'll get this. This shows where they actually worked. This person, this person in particular worked for Philadelphia Eagles organization and pressure washing company. And then down here it shows their high school or whatever school or GED program that they might have gone through in college. Everything down that's all down there. And then if I go back to, if I click on this little paper and pencil right here, that'll take me to this page. This is actually the resume, and there's no name on there or anything. But if you go to this, it shows everything that they posted on their resume. There's two different ways that you can go on for that you can put a resume up. You can enter one online right there, or you can just upload one. You can upload one that you already have.
That's common,
Yeah.
guys.
If you scroll down on the same page, it has all their information right here, their phone number and everything. And then there's some other questions that they might be asked online that their answers will pop up for you on there. And then this shows their availability, everything that they, all the hours they can work. Usually, if you click any, everything else gets checked off.
What happens if somebody says they can't work on Sundays?
Then it'll be all empty.
Well, I mean, they hit any for the rest of the days of the week. On
Right.
Sunday, are the interviewers going to say?
They hit any for each day. Like it's not like there's not like an open availability option or anything. And then this is what I was saying before. This is the box that pops up when you're trying to schedule interviews and everything. This menu is updated here. And if you were to not select them, there's an option box that pops up too that'll say why you not selected them. It'll say something like this person missed their like say the person missed their interview. It'll say candidate not interested or interview declined or something like that. If they say they found employment somewhere else, you can select that too. There's a bunch of different options. So now over here, this is if this is once a candidate gets moved along, past like the second interview, you can see these are all the rec numbers this is the same. That's the same rec number all the way through except for that one. The process is after the second interview or after the first interview. Now this has changed. You can extend an offer to them, and then they have to complete a hire verification thing that's online. It lets basically verifies that they're that they're a real person and that all their information and everything. And then if they accept the offer, then you can move them to initiate their background check, which is online too. And then once on our home page, that first page at the beginning, we get down the bottom there. It'll show when background checks come back. After the background check, after it's approved, then we do the drug test. Actually, at the time of the offer, we usually do the drug test right there. It takes about 10 minutes or so.
You do what'd you say?
At the time of the offer,
You do what?
the drug test. We do it there, and then after they do the drug test, then they initiate the background. It's right there. It's the same thing. Let's see. And then if it, once it comes back negative, hopefully if it, comes back negative, and then we can send them to the other program, PeopleSoft, I'm sure you guys have heard of. And then we confirm their start date, and then they're hired after that. Once they show up for orientation, the first day of orientation, they're hired. That's really about it. I mean, there's, we talked about a lot today about selection. There's a lot of different things that go into it. A lot of people don't realize what it takes to actually get people hired and get them, get them moving and everything. It's a process. It's definitely a process. You guys have any questions or anything? No?